Okay. All right. I'm going to start letting people in. Anybody to let in? We're going to go ahead and get rolling.
Good deal.
All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Zachary Steele. I am the founder and executive director of Broadleaf Writers. I'm always happy to get these Right Now programs going. But before we get started with one tonight, I do want to talk about the upcoming conference that we have in 2 weeks. The 8th Annual Broadleaf Writers Conference is going to be September 23rd and 24th at the Decatur Library in Decatur, Georgia. It is 2 days of panels and workshops and one-on-one pitch and mentoring sessions and plenty of opportunities to get to meet writers and your fellow attendees and to really become part of a community that we've been trying to build for a while. So if that is something that you're interested in, go to broadleafwriters.com. You can get more information about the conference there. And yeah, we're very excited about it. But tonight we're here for our one of our continuing series in the Right Now program, and we are going to be talking with George Singleton, who, in addition to having over 200 short stories published in various magazines and publications, has also published 12 books, including the one that we're here to focus on tonight, The Curious Lives of Nonprofit Martyrs, a wonderful collection of short stories that I've thoroughly enjoyed digging into. So, George, welcome. Very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Zach. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. I guess before we get started, if you're interested in reading anything, then let's go ahead and hit that right up top.
I'll read the first couple pages and then the very ending of a story called The Arbitrary Schemes of Making Humans.
All right.
No, I missed that.
These are your words, George. You're supposed to know them.
The arbitrary schemes of naming humans.
Okay.
My mother named me after a bar of soap. When people ask, though, I lie. I tell them of a conception that took place somewhere on the Grand Strand. Sometimes I go for how it's short for roller coaster. Most times when people ask my name, I get back Cost or Coates or Coes, and usually I plain say yeah. I've never known my biological father, and unless I take some kind of DNA test and shove it in a database, I'll never know him. My mother has it narrowed down to 2 or 3 men from her past. I'm not sure why she brought this up between my ages of about 12 and now, 20 years later, but she said, I always took a shower afterwards with Coast soap, hoping to wash everything away so I wouldn't get pregnant. My college roommate freshman year told me it worked. It didn't. Maybe I should have been using Irish Spring or Dial. Thanks, Mom. Sorry you dropped out of school. I'm no authority in the realm of psychology, but the whole reason I never give 100%, I've never been known to enter any situation full throttle from jobs to relationships, might link back to my subconsciously wanting to live up to my name. Dial would have been a great name, I've always thought, but I'd have ended up working for the telephone company. Lava? Volcanologist. Dove would have made me either an ornithologist or a pacifist activist, I suppose. Don't get me started on Safeguard or Ivory, Lever, Zest. I thought of all this, as I do about daily, while a nice woman named Summer Buck questioned me about my weak points, like they always do on job interviews. This occurred at a supervised group home for adult men suffering a variety of mental illnesses, situated in the middle of a subdivision, the two of us seated in the den of a 5-bedroom place with a basement apartment. About 6 squeeze-top bottles of hand sanitizer surrounded us on the end tables, on the coffee table, one right on the floor. Summer lived downstairs full time. She looked like a cross between Queen Nefertiti and, I don't know, young Lena Horne. I waited for her to belt out stormy weather, probably, but then got hung up wondering if her mother named her after Summer's Eve, the douche that my own college roommate told me prevented unwanted pregnancies. I don't know how many dates I went on, hopeful, a cardboard box of douche beneath the driver's seat. And that's kind of the very beginning of that. Am I really on? I don't see anybody's face. Zach, are you
Oh,
there?
yeah, you're just going to see mine. I was just getting out of the way so you could read.
Okay, okay. Here's the end to that story. So he applies for this job, and he's going to get it. The men come back from doing whatever they do. One of the men grunted, cleared his throat. It was the echolalia man. He sang out an odd, high-pitched noise that ended with hee-haw, and I imagined his either nodding up and down or sideways. Finally, Summer Buck said, "That's exactly how I feel, boys, hee-haw." Then I imagined us downstairs in the basement apartment, how we would name our first child Purell if a girl, Lysol if a boy. I opened my eyes, got in line with the men marching into the kitchen, and thought about what toppings I'd want should I stay for supper. They're going to eat pizza. And that's just kind of the beginning and end.
Mhm.
And that's a story that got taken by a big time journal, and then they pulled it back, and they said there were some politically incorrect terms in there. Like I had adults with Alzheimer's in there, and evidently we don't use that term anymore. And then there was this magazine was in Florida, and they said that the notion of the white narrator and a black woman maybe having sex might get their funding pulled. So I'm going, oh, what the heck, man? Okay, whatever you say.
Yeah.
Most of these stories in that book are about just maybe educated people just trying to figure things out in the world.
Yeah.
That thing about the magazine too, that story takes place in like the early 1980s. So all of the, I've never used a racist term, in a story or anything. So any that adults with Alzheimer's or whatever he was pissed off about would not have been talked about in 1984 or whatever year this thing took place. Right. So that's that.
Yeah, given that you read the beginning of it and the end of it, and I know we've had a conversation about beginnings and endings, I'm curious, like what your process is and how you view beginnings and endings.
First of all, I usually hear a little voice in my head, like sometime during the day. It could be in one of these stories. It goes, "Nowadays, Ms. Starling would get fired from the job." So I hear that voice and I write it down, and I just see where it's going to go. And this sounds like cheating, but my buddy Dale Ray Phillips says, you know what? You borrow from journalism. Get a bunch of that who, what, where, when, how, why in that first paragraph. And I do this because, you don't have to. It's just what works for me. It's kind of like, it's easing the reader in. It's kind of like if you go to a swimming pool in March, April, and you go, I don't know if this water is going to be cold or not. You don't just jump in the deep end. You kind of go down the shallow end. And that reader-friendly first paragraph, I think, gets the reader, okay, I got a compass here. I know where it's going to go. And that's how I work, As for the ending, the best advice I've ever gotten was from an editor I had named Shannon Ravenel. And she and I got along. She said, George, a good story's ending kisses the beginning. And she said, too many of your stories are groping the beginning, which, my cheerleader, Shannon. But what she means is, I'm going to read a little bit more from somebody else, real quick.
Sure, go right ahead.
This is Dale Ray Phillips, and this is a story called Why I'm Talking. Only book he put out. He kind of froze up because he had a 2-book deal and they wanted a novel out of him and he just couldn't do it,
Right.
So this one book called My People's Waltz, put out by Norton.
Okay.
This is the first paragraph. My grandfather kept his floozy in a silver airstream above the bend in the river where the dead crossed over. He had finagled Miss Minnie a job as lifetime caretaker of a little patch of no man's land and a cemetery just across the Haw River. Whenever a black tenant farmer died, we watched from the trailer's picture window as a slipshod barge fashioned of die barrel pontoons and salvage lumber ferried the coffin and mourners across the river to the grave. On these occasions, Miss Minnie usually fried catfish from the deep freezer, which we kept chock full by trot lining. The passage of a neighbor to the other shore dispirited her, but it made my grandfather hungry. That paragraph is that long, is
Mm-hmm.
reader-friendly paragraph, maybe 8
Yeah.
sentences. Who, my grandfather and I, Miss Minnie, what, lived in this trailer. When, I'm not sure it says them, but we know it's just from the tone of it, it's a while back. Where on the Haw River, it goes kind of like that. And
Mm-hmm.
then the story ends. It's kind of a long story. Okay, you go through all this stuff about the father's having an affair, the mother's in a mental institution, whatever. So the mother comes back, and it ends with, let me just find. He's in the pool, he's in the bathtub. I sat unashamed of my nakedness in that tub, listening to the new world my parents promised as I bothered the tan marks on my ankles, which a summer's worth of sun had left above my shod feet. Then I pulled the plug and lowered my finger into the empty space created by water funneling out of the drain. If Sudie, that's Miss Minnie's daughter, was right, this water would enter and exit granite and get caught up as air in the green urge of spring buds. It would christen babies and make hoses hiss and fill space enough for couples on ocean liners to travel. Some of this water was already conspiring to become the dark color of the bend in the river where the dead crossed over. See how that's kind of an echo from the very
Mm-hmm.
first paragraph. Just as water renamed itself as it entered all things, we would redefine ourselves like a twice told tale. In that trailer by the river, we were that close to where one thing becomes another, which is what the Dead Sea. That sounds like Dead Sea, the
Dead Sea, yeah.
SE.
Yeah.
He's kind of echoing what he said in the first paragraph, and that ending kind of comes back and kisses that beginning. And the reason why I like that's how I try to write things is because sometimes when I'm writing a story, every time I write a story, I'll get to I know a story is going to be 5,000 words unless I'm writing a short. At about word 3,000, I go, what the heck am I supposed to be writing now? Where can this story possibly go? And I'll go back and read that first paragraph that I've written, maybe the first page, and I'll go, oh, I mentioned a drive-in movie. I mentioned hot dogs. I mentioned popcorn. Now I'm going, okay, this story is going to end with somehow a mention of a drive-in movie at least, or popcorn or hot dogs, if not all three. But somehow I'm going to do it, and it allows me at word 3,000 to go, okay, now I got a destination to go with this story, and I'm not so flipped out about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's the two aspects of that. One of the things with our conference we do every year that people love the most is the first pages critique, where our attendees will submit their first page and a panel of agents will give their feedback on there. And the advice that I give, because I'm constantly asked, like, how can I do this so it's a good first page? Is like the one thing that I always preach is that journalistic approach to that first page is the who, what, when, where, and I always throw in why, which is like, why should the reader care?
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting to hear you say that, because that it's so vital to catch the attention and fill those gaps, especially in a short story. You got to hit it really fast.
Listen, I've been in this magazine called the Atlantic Monthly 4 or 5 times, and the editor there was C. Michael Curtis, and he just passed away this year. He's 88 years old. He was mean in his career. He would write me. I mean, I got a million rejections from 1986 or 87 until the last year before he retired, in probably 2020. He would write things to me like, "You seem to best person of starting a story, but having no idea where it should go. Or he would say, have you ever thought of something called conflict? And so, and he said, if he said to me, if you don't have conflict in the first page of a manuscript I get, I send it back. This is before email stuff, or submittable. So he and I happened to be teaching one time at a conference in Utah, in Park City, Utah. And I had a bunch of Western writers there. Now, this only works really for short stories. It doesn't really work for novels. Novels, you can start off with 5 pages of description. Short stories be 18 pages. You can't do 5 pages of description of the vista. So I was telling them this kind of stuff, my class, and I could tell they were looking at me like, who the hell are you, Southern boy, coming and telling us about all this? The next day they came to the class and they were on the edge of their seats and all that. And I went, what happened to y'all? And went, we all had a class with Mr. Curtis and he said, you have to get to conflict on the first page or he's going to mail it back. And I went, yeah, what? Listen to me for one. No one listens.
That's funny. Yeah, I guess he was not a man of delicate feedback, was he?
No. At that same conference, I had to do a reading, and I started off by reading a batch of his rejections to me, and and the audience was filled up. So I'm just reading these rejections from Michael Curtis to me, and I think he got kind of pissed off. What he said was, "I've got all the letters you wrote me too," like they were mean or something.
Yeah, it's really fascinating there, but so I want to talk about short stories just because that is definitely the sweet spot that you have here, and I'm curious what draws you to them versus the full length novel. Why short stories are so appealing to you?
I'm not being coy here. I get tired of my own voice. That's I have this voice, and a 300-page novel just didn't really work. And I've published 2 novels. One was called Novel, and I just wrote it because I got tired of these editors and agents saying, you got to write a novel, you got to write a novel. Man, I'm not good at it. So I read this really metafictional thing called Novel. The main character's name is Novel, whatever. Then I wrote another one that was a little bit on... It was just kind of a normal. It was called Work Shirts for Madmen. But even I got tired of that. And in the middle of it, I started writing short stories that I jammed in there, that one got published in the Atlantic Monthly. So, so I get tired of my own voice. I don't have a lot of patience. I started off writing, like when I was in college, I wrote a 450-page manuscript, a 250-page manuscript, a 300-page manuscript. This is in college and grad school. And I always had a couple professors say, you're going to be okay after about 1,000 pages. And I'm smarter than that. It ain't going to take me 1,000 pages. When you add up 450, 250, and 300, it comes to 1,000 pages. Then I started teaching at a college where I had to have 4, and I don't think being a professor is it's not like roofing, but I had 4 classes of English 101 with 25 students in each one. And at this college, they had to write 10 final drafts. It took a lot of time to grade papers. And well, I guess I was teaching some 102 class too, and I started reading more short stories. And up until that point, I'd been reading like Thomas Pynchon and Robert Coover and these kind of experimental writers who were a lot smarter than I am. I couldn't pull that off, I'm not saying the short story writers I read were not smart, but I really right about that time, I started reading Flannery O'Connor and went, oh, I can write about small town South. And I started writing Raymond Carver, whom I love both of them, and going, you can write about just kind of everyday things, just everyday people doing the best they can with what they have, And I also, this poet named Randall Jarrell said the chance of writing a perfect poem are about the same as sitting in your front yard in a lounge chair and having a meteor fall into your lap. I think no one's going to write the perfect novel, but you can write an almost perfect short story. So when, that's kind of my aim. I hadn't done it.
I did a lot of short story writing when I was first learning how to write. and loved it. I was inspired by. Granted, I read a lot of horror at that time, so I was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe and loved how he attacked, just this overall feel of darkness and bleakness and everything that he did. And though I ultimately became far too happy a person to write that kind of stuff, I always tried to get back into short stories as I grew into an adult. And my problem, and I still have this problem, is every time I sit down to write a short story, it ends up getting longer and longer and longer. Like it's just like that ability to focus a story in such as, like you said, 5,000 words or less it's a craft that I think too many people, myself included, have forgotten how to do. And I love seeing collections like this that, that still take on short stories and do it with such strength.
Well, I tell everybody this is the second best advice I ever got, maybe, but I had this big time agent, and I put out novel, and I put out this collection called Drowning in Gruel that had a bunch of the characters from novel in it, and then I wrote that novel called Work Shirts for Madmen. And then my agent said, I had another book of stories, and she said, I'm not going to try to sell another collection of stories of yours. I want you to write a novel that I like. And I said, I don't think you've ever liked any of my work. And she just didn't miss a beat and said, I wish you good luck. And that was the end of the telephone. Got another agent who said, yeah, George, write short stories. So she did a 2-book deal, and then she died unexpectedly. Boy, that's what an ingrate. So I'm kidding. But I kind of just, that thing, this happened to me a couple other times. One time an agent named Nat Sobel, and he kind of gets in touch with everybody when they're younger. He tried to sell a book of stories, and this is like in the late 80s. And he said, have you ever thought of writing a novel? And I said, I've written some, but they're terrible. And he said, write another one. And I wrote it, and I mailed it to him. I took it to the Florence, South Carolina post office. He hired a Learjet or something to reject it. I mean, my arm was still in the mailbox, and I got a rejection. And he wrote, I didn't like this, write another one. And I'm like, man, I don't like people telling me what to do. If I want to be a plumber and not an electrician, I'm going to be a plumber. So from 1988 until 2003, I just wrote short stories. I wouldn't write. And novel, like you said, Zach, it started off, I was going to write a short story called Novel. That was going to be the little joke to send to the agent or editor or anybody. But when it got to page 40, I went, man, that's way too long for a short story, or for me, Joyce Carol Oates. So I just kept plowing away,
Yeah.
Kind of like, for me, it was kind of like an idiot plowing away. But
Yep. Well, actually, I have a question here for you. Let me just read it all. After you spoke about the beginning kissing the end in a previous workshop, I went back and reevaluated all of my short stories, but I asked you at the time, and you said you'd get back to me about later. Do you think you have to kiss the middle as well? You spoke about echoes just now. Do you echo somewhere in the middle as well?
I don't think that's a bad idea. I think, that's exactly what I call it too, is echoes. You got a bad dog named, Rex, and you write about it a little bit, and then Rex shows up all of a sudden somewhere else, and then Rex again, and then Rex is at the end. Yeah. I don't do that very well, but when it happens, I'm glad it usually happens by chance for me.
Yeah. So what was I talk a lot about the inciting event, the catalyst in the story, and it's the thing that turns the story around for a character, sends them into an entirely different world or setting or something like that. But I'm always interested in what the origin story, the catalyst for a writer is. What is yours? When did you decide you wanted to write?
This is going to take a long time to explain.
We've got time.
I've given this answer a lot of times. I have a lot of friends who are, my age or about, 10 years older. And I've heard them, I know I've heard them, more than one of them say, like, well, I read all of Faulkner when I was 12 years old, and I decided I was going to be a writer. And really, you read all of Faulkner when you were, give me a break, you're lying. I, at about the age of 10, there was a show on TV before your time called Laugh In. It was called Rowan and Martin's Laugh In. And there was this guy named Henry Gibson who would come out with this big flower about that big, and he would tell these crazy poems that were funny. And I went, that's what I want to do, you know. But then I never did read or write. You know, I went to college. I'd only read like all those novels that I really dislike: Wuthering Heights, Dickens stuff. You know, Ethan Frome. I thought all story. You know, I thought novel. Yeah, I want to commit suicide after reading all of these books. So I didn't know you could be funny, except for crazy Henry Gibson. Then I started reading Beckett and Ionesco. I went to Furman University when it was Baptist, and I wasn't, to say the least. So I did one of those abroad things. I went and studied in France, and I found that one of those American bookshops, you know, like Shakespeare and whatever it's called, picked up Thomas Pynchon and Donald Barthelme and The World According to Garp. And yeah, these guys are funny. I'm going to try to do that. Up until that time, I'd written some god awful poems and tried to write some one act plays that were terrible. Okay, Don Major's asking questions. I imagine. So anyway, the catalyst for that was reading those people in France, English writers in France, American writers in France, especially Barthelme, you know, and he's an absurdist, and I kind of think of myself as somewhat of an absurdist. So that's probably it.
Okay.
Well, I didn't read Faulkner. I didn't read any Faulkner till I was 33 years old.
I think most of the stuff like that I read, like Charles Dickens and Faulkner and all that stuff, I did because I was forced to.
Yeah.
So it certainly wasn't the thing that made me want to tell stories.
It's
but actually,
oh
no, I was just going to say that Don's question is a good one. But it actually kind of, I have a tie into that because you had talked about like how you attack story, and I'm curious if you have are you one who has to have the structure of the story in place fully before you sit down to write, or are you letting the story guide you?
Yeah, story guides. I've never like made out an outline or you know, I just go, and if I get kind of stuck, I have two characters just talk to each other about something. One will ask a question, the other one will not answer it. The reader's going to go, God, I wonder what the answer is. And finally it comes, you know. Like, sometimes it's kind of like if I could swim. Well, swimming from one shore to another on a lake, sometimes I take a little time just, you know, doing that thing. What is that called?
Yeah.
Treading
water. Yeah.
Treading water. And
yeah.
Can't do it for too long, or the reader will lose interest, I think, or
right.
I, writer, you know,
somebody's going to lose interest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, our question was, do you write a short story, start to end, which I think we kind of just addressed there. But do you dip into the lives of your characters and dip out into another? Do you write the whole story in your head and then let your fingers figure out the rest, which we just talked about, or how long does it take for you to start and finish a story?
Yeah, well, lately it's not been all that great, but you know, probably sometimes 1 week and sometimes 2 weeks, you know. And I've had a lot of stories where I've written like 1,000 words today. Tomorrow I reread that 1,000 words, change all the crap I've messed up on, another 1,000 words. Third day it's 2,000 words, rewrite till you get to 5,000 words, or however long it is. And then I personally, so I've rewritten the story 5 times, and I rewrite it again when it's all done. So I send off to editors when it's done, because, you know, some people say you should put it in a drawer for 6 months or a year. If I did that, I would never send those stories out, because I hate the work. When I'm done, it's dead meat. I don't even remember them. You know, a year later, I will not remember. I don't remember any of these stories, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, do you edit them afterward, or are you just like, you finish it and you're done?
Oh, if an editor tells me,
no, for you personally, like you have personally written a story, do you then go back and go through several edits, or are you just kind of like, I'll let an editor tell me what to do?
I'm let an editor tell me what to do, because a couple reasons. I will beat myself up on it and say, this is just no good. I just get it out there.
Hmm.
Then if an editor goes, excuse me, hey, we think there needs to be some problem with the ending of that story. And, that's what editors are for. They want to put out a good product for the magazines and journals.
Yeah.
Uh, I'll certainly do that. I have never said to an editor, you don't know what you're talking about. I've never said, I've had a lot of students do this, but that's the way I wanted it to, you got 400 misspelled words in this story, but that's the way I wanted it to be. You know, just take the editor's advice.
Right.
I
Yeah.
also don't, I don't
Agree
have a
with
group of friends either because I'm a little bit embarrassed about being a writer, and even with other writers. And I know their time's valuable, so I don't want to mess with it. And friends are usually going to be, oh, this is great. Send it. You're not going to get, like, your mother's not going to give you great advice on it, great criticism.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think that's it's funny you're just kind of talking about your experiences, but I think this is such a invaluable thing for writers to hear because you are, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, a prolific writer. I mean, you've got short stories published all over the place, and you've got 12 collections of books. You've got 12 books that you've written and everything. And one, you still doubt your ability, and two, you've had to deal with so much rejection through the
Oh,
course of your professional life here, and it's like you got all this published and you still deal with those things.
yeah, and you got to be stupid and hard-headed to be a writer. I mean, you don't have to be a genius at all. I know plenty of geniuses who can't write a short story whatsoever. I don't know,
Mm.
but you know,
Well, if you know one, you know more than I do.
yeah, yeah, but you got to be dumb because if I tell this story a lot, if I were in high school and I asked Mary Sue on a date for Friday and she said no, and I went, what about Saturday? No, and then I spent like a year, and then in college, and I would never keep asking her because I don't want that rejection all the time. But as a
Mm.
writer, especially in the early days, if I got, hey, this didn't work, but send us another. Oh boy, I go out and drink a dozen beers to celebrate.
It wasn't quite a rejection.
It's
Yeah,
a lot of rejection though.
it's an invitation to further rejection.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, so there's I have this conversation or debate, whatever it happens to be, with people, and it's like you have Southern writers and then you have Southern stories, and to me they're two entirely different things. Now, to me, you are a Southern writer who tells Southern stories, and I don't know if that's a conscious thing as a person who's lived his life in the South, or or if there are elements that you feel like you have to include. But I'm curious to get your take on what you think a Southern story is defined by.
Yeah, I saw that in one of your emails, and I thought, I don't know what the hell. I don't know what
Well, I mean,
it.
what does it mean to you? I guess
Yeah,
is
for me, it's usually. I can answer this question.
I have confidence in you.
There used to be the old South, and then there was the new South, and now there's kind of the new South with technology and towns like Greenville just exploding, right? Greenville was a textile town during the New South. Now it's a technology town, and
Mm.
iCar and BMW and all that stuff. So a Southern story to me is the heads banging of either the New South and the New South, or the Old South. I used to live in this town called Dacusville, and there was like a cow and a pig a horse and a pig that were best friends. And then there was this really rich person who was like a hand surgeon living next to me. It was kind of all over the place. One time, this is the best story I have about that, is I was buying some beer in a little convenience store, and a guy drove up with a 6-wheel truck and a horse trailer in the back. I got my beer and I stood behind a man who had on short pants, cut off blue jeans, no shoes, and no shirt. So that no shoes, no shirt, no admittance, that didn't work for him. I was not paying attention. I was trying not to look at the guy. And then he said, what the hell kind of donkeys is them? And there were llamas that were being pulled in this horse trailer. And he'd never, I guess, seen a llama. And that's my headbutting of Old South, New South, New South, because because all around here now there are emu farms and ostrich farms and llamas, and you know, I guess that's that. I don't
Yeah.
write short stories, Southern short stories that have grits, banjo players, guns, unless I'm saying, hey, let's do something about gun control in America.
Mhm.
All the stereotypical tropes of a Southern story, I don't. That's old. That's old stuff. You know, that's not. That's been written about. You know, and also it sounds like you're making fun of those people. You know,
Mhm.
well, I don't use. I've never used the word meemaw, peepaw. I've never. I mean, it's okay, um, but I don't know. You know, it's usually
Yeah.
for me. It's upper lower class to lower middle class people surrounded by a lot of questions that they're just trying to figure out. And that could
Right.
be, and if that story works, it should work in Vermont and Montana. You know, if I write
Mhm.
the story well, it's the same thing anywhere. You know,
Right.
like, well, yeah, I get this feeling. I've felt this before.
Yeah. That's fair. Got another question from you, from our audience here for you. Your narrators have a sneaky way of drawing the reader into their harebrained ideas, and I think it's because they are very conversational. Just who are your narrators talking to? Maybe an odd question, but it feels like the reader is almost a character because of that conversational tone.
Uh,
Do you talk to your characters?
well, I never thought of it. If I do, I never really thought about it. But that's another
Mhm.
thing about us for me for a Southern stories. I grew up surrounded by men trying to think up scams, you know, or I mean, I shouldn't mention this, but back in the day, those meter readers for your Duke Power just had two prongs. You could
Mhm.
pull it out, turn it upside down, pull it back in, your electricity would run backwards. So if you knew come on the 30th and read it, you'd have to run from the 1st to the 10th, turn it backwards from the 10th to the 20th, put it back in, so you're only paying for 10 days. I know this because my dad did it.
Okay.
Both of his neighbors did it. And he would turn off all the lights in the house, 3 in the morning, all the electricity. And still, when he pulled that thing out, a spark would just light up the side of the house, you know.
Mhm.
So I think I do write a lot about scammers or people trying to think up scams, and usually finding some kind of comeuppance for what they do. I've never thought about my reader being a character, but I do know I have a lot of people who read those stories say, I know exactly who you're talking. I could see this when I was 15 years old, or 20 or 30, and I go, thanks. You know,
Mhm.
I may not
Um,
answer that thing. So I apologize, whoever asked that question.
it felt like an answer. Um, with like, for example, the title of this particular book. So you have a short story collection. It's got all of these stories in there. Um, Not every author gets the opportunity to actually title their book, because some publishers want complete control of that. But do you select the titles, and what makes you choose, like in this case, this particular title? Is it because there's something that, like, some favorite aspect of that story that you like, or you just love the title?
I had found myself. I wrote an individual story called "The Curious Life of Nonprofit Martyrs," and then I wrote another one with almost the same title, but it was different characters and a different story. Then, because I didn't have anything to do, Zach, I just sit around and say, hey, why don't I try to write a whole bunch of stories with people working nonprofits, and I'll make up all these crazy nonprofits. So
Mhm.
that's how that came. And I thought, and I think all those titles, for the ones that came out in magazines, I think those were the titles of all of them. What a Dime Costs. Cock Rescue is about a rooster rescue. It sounds dirty, and I did not think of that title. An editor
Mhm.
gave me that title. I was kind of against it. Um, I just thought this was the quirkiest title I could come up with for a bunch of stories about nonprofit martyrs.
Hmm.
And I've never had a I've never had a book. I mean, Half Mammals of Dixie was my title, and These People Are Us is my title. Why Dogs Chase Cars is my title. They're Callous Town. That was just kind of normal. Um, Staff Picks was my title, but I was actually trying to write a bunch of holiday stories. And then I thought, man, there are a hell of a lot of holidays. And then I thought, I'm gonna write a story called Staff Pick. So when it's in the bookstore, the people say, "Well, that must be a good book." Because that didn't seem to work. That little scam did not work at all.
Harebrained idea.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, another question here. I was at an author reading recently, and the author told the audience that at another event in his hometown, someone created a comparison with two columns, one with his character names and the other with real people from the town where he based his fictionalized memoir. Writers borrow from the people and places, and some writers take great liberties here. Has anyone ever come up to you from where you live and said, I know such and such, or this guy is me? Any funny stories? And the same question for settings.
Yeah. I had a story come out in Playboy magazine one time, and I was working on a house, this little mountain cabin that Glenda and I made, and there's a little pond there, and this woman came charging up. I had a framing hammer in my hand, and she said, "I know you wrote a story about me, and it's upset my husband very much." I said, "I didn't write a story about you, Leslie." "Yes, you did. Yes, you did." And I thought back, and I said, that woman was in that story. The narrator says, "This beautiful and intelligent woman lives around the pond from me. So that's not you, Leslie." And she got pissed off, and we never spoke again. Sometimes I kind of mix and match names from my hometown, or I look in the obituary or get out old telephone books. One time in the state of Mississippi, I was doing this reading in front of a live audience, but it was being aired on Mississippi Public Radio. And then I was signing books later, and this guy showed up, and he said, "Hey, I didn't come to this thing. I was in my car, and I listened to it, but where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Greenwood, South Carolina." And he said, "I thought you were from South Carolina because I know all those names because, and he was from Clinton, South Carolina, just down the road. I try not, I think about it. Sometimes I'll think like, oh, I'm going to use the name Zach in a story. Well, I can't do that because Zach Steele's going to think it's him, and Zach Vernon's this other guy I know. He's going to think it's him. So I kind of sometimes go to odd names that I don't think really exist. But yeah, has anybody ever? Half the time when I am really kind of writing about somebody, I've never called on it. But when I'm not, they think that I am writing about them.
Yeah. I mean, do you draw a lot from life experiences in these stories, or are they just pure creation?
In this particular book, the one story that's from my life, it's the first story. And when I was a child, at about 10 or 12, my father, who had fallen 45 feet into the empty hold of a ship. So he had these 57 broken bones, and he went through a lot of hip operations and all this stuff. So we moved to South Carolina from California, of all places, in the Merchant Marines out there. But we were lower, upper lower class, I would say, or maybe at best lower middle class. He didn't get very much money in an insurance settlement, whatever. But he liked to go to these polo matches down in Aiken, South Carolina. And there were like a lot of rich people who would go to these polo matches with like champagne and tablecloths and all this crap. So we would go, and then he'd say, "Go get." Sometimes the polo ball would go out of bounds, and go get it. So I had this collection of polo balls, which are these bamboo things. But he also liked to go to this fancy hotel. It's called the Wilcox Hotel. And it mentions in that story that the men's room had doors that you had to put a dime in a slot for the door to open. And there was the door didn't go all the way down to the floor. My father, to save a dime, would have me crawl under it to pee and then open up the door for him, So that one was kind of brought from life. The one about Veterans Against Guns in North America, I made up. The one about the kid who gets shot out in the middle of the field by his father, who's a veterinarian, made up. I think they're almost all. None of these are really from life. Maybe an earlier Cock Rescue, I never had a rooster problem. Yeah, they're fiction.
Yeah. Just curious. I know it's impossible to avoid getting some elements of whether it's emotional or some aesthetic to your story that comes from your life. But I'm always fascinated to see whether or not people are drawing from real experiences or not.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got about
I am. I mean, I am indirectly. I know I am a lot of times,
right.
but I've slanted away from how it really happened. It's not going to make good fiction. You got to add something to.
Oh yeah.
You got to add something to that pot of beans that you got on the stove.
Yeah, I think the fictionalized memoir event that I don't know if it's the same event that we did with Jeffrey Dale Lofton, but he was talking about the real life versus the fictionalized real life, and how there's so much of the timeline that isn't maybe that interesting. So you kind of have to, if you're going to fictionalize it, you have to kind of spruce it up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I understand that. Well, we've got like about 5 or 10 minutes left. So if anybody has
I
any
think
other questions,
Dawn is asking.
yeah, I'm gonna read that one. I just was letting everybody know that if you got any other questions, now's a good time to get it in. But yeah, Dawn has. I've always felt that the foundation for wanting to become a writer was based on early experiences with the books we read and read again during childhood. What were some of those books for you? Obviously, it wasn't Faulkner. Yes is yes is such a stereotypical question, but I have never asked this question, and I was curious.
I never read a whole bunch. My father took me to a place called Noah's Ark that was in a town called Hodges, South Carolina. It's a used bookstore. Then it was in Coronacus, South Carolina. And then it was last up in Tryon, North Carolina. And Mrs. Hawthorne, whose husband owned it, she was my one good English teacher in high school. My father went and got me these books. I don't have any of them anymore, called Bobby Blake books. And they were kind of like the Hardy Boys, but set in like 1910. And he had read those as a child, and he wanted me to read them. And I hated them. I mean, come on, really? They ran away from home on a mule. Give me a break. I didn't read the Bible, except for Job. I kind of like that book, book of the Bible. So I didn't read a whole lot, not till college. I was a slow learner.
Hmm.
If anything, I read Sports Illustrated. I was more interested in running. I was a distance runner. The whole reason I went to college is because a track coach at Furman said, "Hey, come here. We don't give really scholarship money, but I can get you to apply for free." And then I ripped a oblique my senior year. Ow, I just broke my elbow on that thing. I ripped an oblique. And now I've used this in fiction before. My doctor, my childhood doctor, his name was Dr. Roach, said, "I think you have gas," and gave me these pills for like 6 weeks. And when I went out to run, I felt like I was having an appendicitis. I mean, obliques really hurt.
Yeah, right.
And then I just said, I've lost it. And then I went, I'm really not smart enough to be an athlete in college anyway, so I better study, and did okay.
Yeah. Well, I guess I want to wrap this up with like one more question about Curious Lives, and I know it's sort of a favorite children question, but are there any characters in here that you like distinctly love and would love to tell more stories about, or even is there one story in here that just like you love more than the others?
Well, there's some of these characters travel in between stories. So the story that I read, no, I didn't read from that. The first story, what a dime costs. This guy's name is Julian Walker, and then he shows up later in one or maybe two stories. I think he shows up in Cock Rescue, but I like that story. What a dime. I don't like a whole lot of. I mean, I can count on 3 fingers stories that in my past. I like a story called Show and Tell. That was Half Mammals of Dixie, and I like this What a Dime Costs today, but I probably won't next week. Like I said, dead meat, man. Go on to the next project.
Right. Well, what is the next project?
Who knows?
Oh,
well, I got a book of essays coming out in November, but that's already done.
It's such a loaded question because I mean, writers have no idea. I mean, shoot, what 10 or 15 years ago, Stephen King retired, and how many novels has he put out since then? So, I never want to ask a writer, when do you think you're going to be done? Or like what's next is always a loaded one because you may not know.
Well, I'm not even thinking about it, Zach, because I don't really like the business anymore.
Hmm.
I don't really like going out. I can't do. I'm not good at my own publicity. I can't self promote. I it makes me feel I should be writing, and those
Hmm.
publishing houses have publicists or PR people. That's what they should be doing. Don's going to talk in a minute. Um, uh, so and I'm 65. I just I don't have that much of the fire left. I probably said all I need to say,
Yeah, that's
but
fair.
I'll sit down, and write. Well, actually, no, I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know. I feel like once you open the doorway that allows these stories to come in, it's hard to shut it. So
Yeah,
I'm going to expect that we're going to hear more from you.
well, it could be, but I'd say it's a 50-50 chance.
Well, we'll take that. I think every day is a 50-50 chance. So, we'll just keep going with that.
Living through the heat is a 50-50 chance.
Oh man, I'm so done with summer.
Getting shot.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Well, I appreciate you making time. I know you've had a lot going on lately. I'm glad we were able to fit this in
I am too.
and talk a little bit. Hopefully we'll be able to do it again sometime.
I had a good time, man. You did a great job. Thanks for the good
Oh,
question.
well, I appreciate that. Thanks. I like compliments in the form of checks because I am a nonprofit martyr, and no.
That's right. That's right.
But thank you to you, and thank you to everybody that's been here to watch this. If just in case you missed any of it or would like to listen to it again, we will have an edited version on our YouTube channel sometime next week. And if you haven't yet signed up for the conference and are interested in doing it, please do it because we'd love to have you there. And
That's a nice
that's
place.
it.
That's a nice
What's that?
place. That's a nice place in Decatur where you're having it too.
Yeah, I know you've been there before. Yeah, the Georgia Center for the Book is based out of there, and they do fabulous work. And we're looking forward to. We did our first 3 conferences there, and this will be our first one back there, and we're
Good.
very excited because it's a very intimate setting and gives us plenty of opportunity to really foster that sense of community.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you again,
Thank
and
What
I
do I
look
do?
forward to talking.
Do I hit this little button that says leave?
If you want to just cut out, man, you just cut out.
Technology ain't my thing.
We're